General Hospital spoilers for February tease that Britt and Jason delve deeper into the inner workings of Cesar Faison's final project. Apparently, he left his cold fusion research unfinished as he tried to develop a cure for his own Huntington's disease. Now, Cullum, Andrew Hawkes, and Jen Sidwell's Carlo Rhoda have taken over. And in order to complete what Faison started, they needed his daughter. Who knows, maybe they needed her mother too. Did Liesl help fake Britt's death to save her life? Dr. Britt Westbourne's Kelly Thibault Huntington's disease diagnosis devastated her and her mother. She always knew of the possibility that she'd inherit the disease from her father, Cesar Faison. But it wasn't until she got tested and learned that she carried the genetic marker. Did Liesl help fake Britt's death to save her life? According to General Hospital recaps from January 30th, 26, Britt told Jason that Heather's attack and saving Jocelyn, Eden McCoy, was real. Mother would do anything for her child, especially if that child has a terminal illness. No price is too high to pay to ensure a long and healthy life for your child. Is that how the WSB, Sidwell, and Cullum knew to swoop in as Britt was taking what would have been her last breath? General Hospital had never been shy about drama, but the question that hung in the halls of Port Charles in early February felt like a thunderclap. Did Liesl Obrecht help fake Dr. Britt Westbourne's death to save her life? The rumor thread started like a low hum. Britt, the brilliant but brittle former chief of staff at General Hospital, had received a diagnosis that no woman should have to carry. The genetic marker for Huntington's disease, a slow, cruel thief of movement and memory. For Britt, whose life had been built on control, on pedigree, precision, and the illusion that she could outmaneuver any weakness, the knowledge was seismic. She became alternately icy and fragile. She snapped at colleagues, retreated into clinical silence, and had the rare, private tremor of a person who suddenly realized the floor might give at any moment. Jason Morgan, the man who had loved Britt with a kind of patient stubbornness, was both anchor and investigator. He'd watched her drink too little and work too much. He'd watched Liesl hover in the background, a study in paradox, maternal, manipulative, brilliant in her own offbeat way. Liesl, once the queenpin of moral ambiguity herself, had always loved Britt with a warped, fierce tenderness that made everyone else uneasy. When Britt's diagnosis came, Liesl's expression had been flat for a heartbeat, then molten with plans. Behind the scenes, factory-style rumors spread about Faison's last obsession, cold fusion. Cesar Faison, master villain and father to Britt, had left behind notebooks and encrypted hard drives that hinted at a fevered, impossible pursuit, a cure, maybe, or a weapon masked as salvation. The idea of Faison playing God in any capacity was as chilling as it was predictable. If anyone could be both the poison and the antidote to Britt's fate, it was her father. Enter Cullum and Jen Sidwell, names that meant money and laboratories, men with enough influence to procure equipment that belonged in a science fiction fever dream. Cullum held the funds and the access to labs. Sidwell had the secrecy and the contacts. They were the kind of men who could finish what a madman started if the price and the payoff aligned. What ties they had to the WSB, the whisper-quiet global security branch that worked in the gray areas of law, made them both terrifying and oddly credible partners for any clandestine medical coup. On a January night that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter roses, Britt's spine bowed under the knowledge that the disease would eventually win. There had been a confrontation, torn, raw, with Heather, who had, in the chaos of Port Charles melodrama, attacked Britt in a moment of misdirected fury. Jason had arrived to save what he could, Jocelyn was spared. The city exhaled. But it was what happened in the quiet afterward that set the rumors ablaze. They said Britt had taken what would have been her last breath on a hospital bed, a staged scene, an implausibly convenient moment for secret science to slip in. The WSB units had been watching. Cullum and Sidwell had been waiting. Liesl had been nearby, her face a mask of suffering and resolve. The headline everyone whispered: did Liesl help fake Britt's death to save her life? Jason, never one to accept a story at face value, dug his hands into the dirt of Port Charles and started pulling. Britt, if she had indeed been pronounced dead, had left behind a life unlived and a staff scandal that would make the news cycle spin. A funeral had been planned, flowers a eulogy. Carly had practiced her speech. Those who had loved Britt in complicated ways showed up to stare at the casket, feeling guilty or relieved or both. Liesl stood by, small in a too-large coat, and mouthed something to herself that no one heard. The city mourned. The city also whispered. Only Jason, stubborn and literal, refused to accept closure. His instincts told him that Britt's death, if it was real, had the stink of falsehood. People like Faison and the men who finished his projects didn't die on convenient hospital terms. They went underground. They faked deaths as naturally as they breathed. Jason's questions took him through the mechanical underbelly of Port Charles's medical bureaucracy, records, signatures, the crooked footnotes of WSB involvement. He found anomalies, an unusual transfer of an instrument case, a coded text sent at 2:14 a.m., a borrowed MRI machine that had never returned to its maker. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Britt woke up in another kind of room altogether. It was not a cemetery. It was a clinical nest stitched together with contradiction. The sterile smell of a hospital, the hum of research equipment, the careful, human clutter of a woman's belongings that suggested someone was living here in hiding. Britt opened her eyes to the sight of Liesl sitting in a chair with the posture of someone who hadn't slept in days, but had learned how to live on adrenaline. For a second, Britt didn't know where she was. The world hummed. Her memories returned in staggered, jagged bursts. The diagnosis, Heather's attack, the breathlessness, then darkness. Tears came hot and confused to her eyes. "Mom," Britt rasped. The word came out like both a knife and a plea. "Don't call me Mom yet," Liesl said, the voice brittle with a laugh that was almost a sob. "Call me something useful." Britt tried to sit up and panic bobbed in her throat, because if she wasn't dead, something else was undoubtedly at work. Liesl explained, in that offhand way she had, that the only way to get Britt to the people who had the resources to try where doctors said there was none left was to make the world stop looking. A faked death, if expertly done, would buy them anonymity. It would give Cullum and Sidwell and the private researchers who had inherited Faison's work time to attempt an experimental protocol rooted in the cold fusion project, a strange hybrid of neuroscience and bioenergetics, promising renewed cellular stabilization. It sounded like alchemy. It sounded like hubris. Britt's first coherent thought was fury. "You killed me," she said. "No," Liesl replied. "I killed the version of you who let the world take you. I bought you time." Time, of course, had a price. The men working in the underbelly of Faison's last endeavors wanted data, and not the descriptive kind. They wanted subjects who could test what their instruments could do. They wanted Britt, Faison's daughter, because genetic lineage mattered for this research, and because a cure, if it existed, would carry the poetic reversibility of a villain's art. The son of a monster could undo the monster's damage. Britt's mind exploded into ethics and fear. Would she be a lab rat? Was this a consuite for experimental cruelty? Her upbringing had taught her to distrust anyone who spoke of cures with a soft smile. But Jason's boots on the ground had already found holes in the story. Payments wired to a shell organization, private planes that flew in at odd hours. When he confronted Liesl, he saw a woman who had traded her moral gray for a plan she could no longer disentangle herself from. "You can't just sell my daughter to the highest bidder," Jason had told Liesl, his voice low and dangerous. "She's not for sale," Liesl snapped. "She's for saving." That line, saving, was the fulcrum of everything. Liesl's history as a woman who had kept and lost children, who had bartered and connived in the name of protection, made the moral calculus messy. If anyone could imagine the impossible, it was Liesl Obrecht. If anyone could believe that a madman's last work contained a hidden redemption, it was her. Britt's time in the hidden lab was an odyssey of small betrayals and surprising tenderness. Cullum was clinical and detached, a man with the clinical hunger of someone who had been given access to the cutting edge of human biology. Sidwell was softer but relentless, the sort of scientist who believed that the end justified the means. They couldn't promise Britt a cure. They only offered a chance and a series of contradictory successes, markers that improved, a tremor that lessened, a memory that anchored again. They also threatened. The project required secrecy, and secrecy required loyalty. Liesl had to sign non-disclosure agreements like a penitent and trade favors with old colleagues at the WSB. Jason, who had refused to cede Britt's fate to anyone else, grew angrier with each passing day. He visited in the small hours, disguised and watchful, and watched as Britt slowly grew muscles into her limbs again. She learned to walk in a way that felt like escape. Each step she took was a question left in Christina's wake.